This is the Open University.
Good morning. I wanted to tell you something today that I've never told you before, which is that I admire you. I admire you. And admiration is really important. I don't want this just to be a pep talk, but I do want it to be a pep talk because I want you to know how amazing you are at what you do and how it's influenced me and how I really want to be you. And my appetite to be you is kind of central to what I do. It's easy to talk about self-admiration and kind of narcissism and loving oneself, but loving the other is super important and maybe not distinguishable from that. That's the interesting thing, that self-love and admiration of others can be the same thing. I suppose you'd have to invoke Eno's idea of scenius rather than genius at this point and say that nobody's an island and nobody emerges as a talent on their own. They have to be related to some kind of collective way of thinking that produces greatness. And that how do you make the ferment, the kind of group context that will allow brilliant people to emerge with brilliant work? Your work has particularly influenced me, not for great reasons, not because of my innate generosity in recognizing your talent, but also because I just wanted to steal the best parts of your work. The very first time I remember that time you were performing at X, and I came along, and I had my phone with me and I was videoing, and I wanted to take it away and maybe put it up online to show how advanced I was in my tastes. And because I'm quite snobby, I wanted there to be only about 1,000 views. If you got more views than me, than I get, for instance, in this video, I might start to be a little jealous of you, a little bit chippy. But because you're less popular and less successful than me, I feel that knowing about you marks me out as some kind of elite, some kind of clever tastemaker, influencer, hipster, whatever you want to call it, who goes to places like X, where I did see you perform. You were brilliant, and I just thought more people should know about this because not enough people recognize you. There isn't enough. There is a quantity of people who recognize one, which is enough. I personally don't think I've reached that quantity yet in my own career, but I'm not far off it actually. Because once I break through the ceiling of, like 1,000 views on YouTube or whatever, I will then become a popular property. I'll become, Air Supply, Rod Stewart, whatever. I'll become a boring but popular figure who really can't inspire anything except merchandisers and the people making dollars. There's a beautiful pattern on the floor. I wonder if I can film that somehow. I think I'll film it. Wait a second, because I want to put that in as a kind of a thing on the side. Get my iPad, because I've got so many iOS devices filming this whole thing. As it were. Yeah, I totally loved your performance, and I thought, this is something I wouldn't have thought of on my own. Something I could think of, but wouldn't have. So, obviously, the second... Oh, it's gone already. That's amazing. It's sort of coming back. There's a lot of clouds in the sky. It's now totally gone. There was this scintillating leaf pattern, but there's so many clouds blowing across the sun that it keeps coming and going. I'm going to just hold the iPad here and film. You see, I admire the person who noticed that on the ground. I admire that part of myself. So I wanted to show him in action, but now he missed his moment. You see, it's such a transitory moment, and the people's careers are like that as well, that you might be brilliant this week, and then in 5 years' time, after having stand for you and championed you to my small but influential clique of followers, I might then be indifferent to the rest of your career, which would be very sad, Not something we fail to recognize in the career of David Bowie, who would pick up on people when they were hot and then drop them like hot potatoes a bit later. Generous, surely very generous of him, but also opportunistic, vampiristic. He would suck your blood when your blood was good and then spit you out when you were no longer useful to him. So there is a kind of ruthless element in this kind of standing of other people's talents. God knows I've experienced that moment of championing someone and then being embarrassed later by what they turn into or by the fact that they simply got too popular. So admiration, which can curdle like milk when its sell-by date goes off. I suppose I wrote a song in 1999, one of the Stars Forever songs is for a friend of mine who's still a friend to this day, Florence Manlique, who's the wife of Gilles Van Zeppelin, also known as Trug. I admire them, but Florence asked me to put this line in her song about her greatest creative feat is admiration. And that's a very interesting line. She's always been very fulsome in her praise for people and her admiration. Oh, it's come back. I'm going to try and film that scintillating light on the floor. And it's a good point that admiration can in itself be a creative feat of some kind. Oh yes, we're getting some good footage of it this time. Beautiful. So when I first met Gilles and Flo in Paris in 1996, they lived on the Rue Simard in Montmartre, where I also lived. And their style was just it was so much of the moment. I remember it because they were into the Gentle People, this group called the Gentle People that nobody remembers now, nobody talks about. But we're very much in that 70s retro mode of the 90s, that the 90s seemed to be in some way replaying the 70s. To me, anyway. Their flat was immaculate. They had shelves with their clothes folded so neatly on them. It was like a shop. Gilles had this keyboard and he would give an impromptu concert. If you went in there, he would actually sing and you'd be enchanted. I'm often enchanted and mesmerized by people when they perform, I have to say that. There is a kind of mental state I enter into when I voluntarily hand myself over to someone's power. And this often happens when it's a very gentle power, talking of gentle people, when there isn't aggression in it. Somebody's not trying to bludgeon me into submission, but actually trying to seduce me. I'm very willingly seduced by gentleness, because it seems rational to me. Gentleness is the ultimate rationality. And so there was this gentle authority which Gilles had when he sang, and then Flo was making artwork and drawing all the time. But she does it with an almost monastic intensity. She's always at her drawing table. She almost never goes out. She makes beautiful, stylish drawings of patterns and forms, and she works in fashion. She's done scarves for Hermès and stuff like that. So she's an aesthete in a way which I can recognize and appreciate. In a way that I've seen a lot in Japanese people too, and I hugely admire Japanese people like Shuge. Shuge, at least I'll get his name right this time. I think I called him Shunge last time. Whose video I used for Parasite, my Parasite song. The idea of being a rather tortured soul with a rather medieval monk-like outlook, perhaps a misanthropic and Weltschmerzy kind of outlook as well, but being a particular kind of, I don't know why the phrase creative weed jumps into my mind. I suppose that's having gone to a private school where so-called weeds were denigrated and rugby players were the heroes of everyone. I very much identify with the weeds. I don't like to distinguish between weeds and flowers. I think the weeds and the flowers are all the same thing. Oh, it's even better now. I'm gonna film that again. It looks amazing. The morning sunshine coming in through the leaves and getting this amazing scintillation pattern. I admire God, the big G, if if there is someone up there for having created things like this scintillating pattern on my floor. That's a kind of maker's envy. I think if you're a maker of any kind, you have to admire the ultimate maker, or imagine that there is an ultimate maker who has the intention of creating stuff and creates everything. What am I talking about? I don't know. Oh yes, you. I was talking about you. That's the important thing in this video. It's a pep talk, and it's a love letter, a declaration of love for you, because you are already a kind of self-selecting elite. Why do I have to keep using these elitist terms? I think you have to have some idea of a meritocracy with an elite which has deserved its success, or even better, a meritocracy in which there is a totally worthless elite in terms of the high earners and the successes out in the public world, but with a secret elite, a secret group of people who are influential, who are known to be amazingly creative, and who are undersung, underestimated, and who therefore have a kind of kinetic energy of their just desserts, which will probably never be achieved. They'll never actually score their just desserts. They'll never get the paycheck. But they are the people history will possibly remember, or the knowing ones, the smart ones understand, is how Devoto put it. They're the people that the smart ones writing the smart books will refer to. And so I think you guys, just by virtue of watching this video, for one thing, are that kind of little group. And I'd like to thank you for that. I'd like to thank you for supporting me in my career. But it's not just, thanks to the fans thing. It's also that I know that individually a lot of you are creating very great work, very good work, which maybe is also under-recognized, under-noticed, underappreciated, undervalued, underpaid. A lot of talk recently about nurses and doctors and teachers being heroes. But also, and this is one reason that living in Germany is great, because Germany does value its artists more highly than other countries, and Angela Merkel has earmarked a lot of money to go to the support of self-employed creative people who are here in Berlin a very significant class and a significant motor of the economy. So they must be doing something right in terms of being valued and appreciated. But of course a lot of them are working below their optimal levels, below their powers, and haven't yet been recognized, or maybe they're too young. Maybe some of you are too young to yet have truly discovered your vocation and got your ass in gear and started being recognized and earning money. So to those of you who are at that stage, I have a very simple formula. I say, if you want to make art, just start. Just start, and you will then continue, and by starting and continuing, you will improve. And after a mere 10 years or so, you will become brilliant, and you'll be unassailable. You'll have a position in the creative field that people will recognize at the very least. As I guess I do. It's one of the more surprising features of my career that it's been quite late blooming, and certainly in terms of books, it's good to hold something back, to be kind of polymath, but to hold something back for later on, because how depressing would it have been to have made my mark in the 80s, for instance, and then to have a declining star ever after, and to be doing the chicken in a basket nostalgia circuit, and then for that to be taken away because coronavirus made it impossible for anyone to gather around chicken in a basket in any public place. That would have been terribly depressing. To be able to keep making good records at home, keep writing books at home which get good reviews and all the rest of it. Yeah, it's good. So my advice would be hold something back, but also just start. I think that's the important thing. Start, and as I said last time, any creative process is simply the sum of 1,000 or 1,000,000 tiny decisions which are all motivated by quite intuitive things, which are also to do with the seniors, to do with what you've been, and you and your generation have been led to believe was good. So a lot of it's hardwired, and it happens below the surface even of your own consciousness. This is one reason that people often say that what they produce, their work, comes from God or from somewhere else, from another realm which is pre-existing. Not to get too Platonic, but there are these forms which are kind of pre-existing, and then you just have to discover them. Forms living inside the marble, and you just chip away at the outside and the forms will emerge. There is that sense, but of course what's really happening is that kind of unconscious or semi-conscious imperatives built into your way of thinking, your into the doxa, as Barthes calls it, the orthodoxy prevailing at any given moment in society, the groups that have formed your thinking, and maybe some conflicts between those groups. Is it cool to be cool, or is it cool to be uncool? Normcore, all that stuff. There's constant inversions in what decisions you should make, and maybe making mistakes is very important for that reason. That you can affirm a new kind of taste by defying your old taste, or your society's old taste. I mean, revolutions, palace coups of various kinds, like punk, were demonstrations of that. But that can happen on an individual level as well, that you can defy your own expectations of what you might do next. And that can be very small defiances. And of course, most of the time, I would say at least 80% of your decisions are happening according to a kind of aesthetic which is, certainly by my age, is well established and very difficult to break free of. The way I dress, the way I make music, these things are probably not going to change very much. And I'm kind of quite fortunate in not really wanting them to change very much. I think I'm quite happy with the results they're giving just now. Don't kill the goose that lays the golden eggs, even if the eggs are not earning you that much gold. But it is, of course, good to shake up one's expectations. And, I guess I've done that recently in terms of using Japanese folk samples, or buying an accordion and making that my main instrument instead of the guitar. You can always sort of shake things up in some key area, if only to then rally all the sort of usual hardwired decisions around this new element, and basically re-explain your aesthetic to a new central feature like the accordion. While nevertheless, and the same would go for changing country, that I can make a record in America, and then I can make a record in Tokyo. That happened between Folktronic and Oscar Tennis Champion. I don't know if really very much changed, but the American context definitely was seeping in terms of New York, ironic New York groups like Centuries or Fisher Spooner at the time, Electro Clash. What was going on in the New York music scene was informing what I did, or Arto Lindsay, veterans like that were also there informing what I did. But also the fact that there was an Appalachia of the imagination which was informing Folktronic. By the time I went to Tokyo the following year, a whole new set of things were influencing what would be producing my music, and actually a weird kind of Scottish retro element started entering into what I was doing. Pirates, Cantonese opera. Actually, that was a carryover from New York, because I used to listen to Cantonese opera in Vanessa Weng's Dumpling Bar on Eldridge Street. And I thought, wow, this sounds... The chefs were listening to it in the kitchen. I thought, this sounds so outlandish, this music. A couple of years later, 2004, I was in Hong Kong, and I went to the Cantonese opera. I think it was called the Sunshine Theatre, and was blown away by the theatricality of it. And Asian theatre in general is just one of the things I love. Kabuki theatre also. So that was beginning to be a new context. The Asian elements in New York started to turned into actual Asian elements living in Japan for the first time in 2001, 2002, and then that in turn led to the records of the teenies, the decade we've just come out of, where I'm sampling Japanese folk music, Ondo and Matsuri music, and yeah. Anyway, I'm talking about myself again. I should be talking about you, because you are my biggest inspiration. And something else I said last week was kind of telling, which is that I hate my own drawing style, and that what I like is other people's drawing and writing styles. There's some fetish I have for the way other people do their handwriting. For instance, at school, I didn't like my own handwriting. I didn't really have any set handwriting. I could change my handwriting. I had one printed style, one joined up style, various kind of styles which I'd stolen from various sources, from comic book lettering, or from say that some guy in my class, there was a guy called P.B. Smith who did a huge, when he signed his name, huge P and a huge B and a huge S, and then Smith itself was tiny, a little bit like a sort of Pontiac or Cadillac 1950s chrome lettering that you might see. And I was really impressed by that. So I really liked to feel the need or the desire, the appetite to steal someone else's style if I really admired it. It was very unusual that I would see a style that I admired enough to want to steal it and to get into the kind of trouble. Or to put, when you steal something and copy someone else, you obviously are putting yourself into second place. This has been another feature of my life, that because I've admired David Bowie, for instance, I basically condemn myself to be a second-rate David Bowie. You put yourself into that ballpark, into that comparison area by copying someone. I've just, of course, done this AI Bowie cover. What I found doing that, I mean, as I keep finding when I try to cover Bowie, is that I can't sing anything like him. Verse 1 is me singing this apparently Bowie-esque song, which algorithms have determined follows some of his compositional processes. Verse 2 suddenly is him himself, his own voice manipulated by the algorithm to sing the same nonsensical gibberish. And of course when he's singing it, you can hear all the characteristic Bowie inflections, and it's suddenly a Bowie song. It sounds like Velvet Goldmine, or it sounds like Bombers or something like that, one of those early songs. I can't do it, and admiring doesn't mean that you make a simulacrum. This is an important point. Admiration often results in failure, and that failure is a kind of success in that you come up with an original style by failing to reach what your avatar, your model, has actually done. So that's good to bear in mind, that when I'm trying to rip you off because your style is so bloody fantastic, I'm probably going to fail, and it's probably going to sound like me. This is something I never realized about David Bowie, that he himself was, on every song he was ripping somebody off or trying to imitate somebody. He was being Neil Young, he was being Elvis Presley. My ignorance of those artists' work led me not to recognize that he was even doing that. I thought it was all him. You know, or it might have been, what's his name, Biff Rhodes, you know, he was sort of picking up at least on obscure people from time to time and ripping them off, which in some ways is a worse crime, because once Bowie has done a Biff Rhodes song, if you're Biff Rhodes, of course you're grateful, but it also becomes an oppressive weight. This is something Iggy Pop also found. It becomes an oppressive weight when everyone's first question to you in interviews is going to be, hey, so Bowie covered one of your songs, or Bowie was your best friend for a while. Isn't that great? Yes and no, you know, because you're in the shadow of these people. So I want to thank you for being my inspiration. I do know some of you personally, and I admire you intensely. You're very intelligent people. I always notice that. You're quick thinking and appreciative, generous. You're smarter than most people out there. Which sounds elitist, but it's just a fact of life. I'm sorry, it is a fact of life. It took me a very long time to realize this, but because I thought everybody was smarter than me when I was young, largely because they were, you know, at school most people were brighter than me. I was put down into the C stream. I was terrible at everything except English, so I had a strong sense of my own intellectual inferiority, which only really kind of changed when I, to my immense surprise, got a first-class honours degree at university. I didn't expect for a moment to get that. I thought I would get a third or something, you know, whatever W.H. Auden got. A lot of people got terrible degrees, and I thought I'd be one of them. But I did work quite hard, you know, in the last year towards my final exams, and it was interesting to get assessed. It's the only time in my life I've really been obsessed and assessed in that way. So it was nice to get a positive outcome from that. But I still don't think I'm smarter than most people. You know, in many ways I'm still very naive, and I've kind of preserved my naivety quite a long time. My naivety of practical things, anyway, or of, you know, just how to get on in the world. I don't think I'm very good at that. I also admire your physicality, and there's something I really envy and admire in some people is their embodiment and their physicality, or their sociability, the fact that they get on well with other people and have a kind of emotional empathy and intelligence, emotional intelligence, i.e. empathy. But I also, as I was saying, I also admire physicality and people who are good with their bodies, and not sports people. Because I'm not a jock, I'm not enthralled to jocks. I'm not, except being Scottish, if you want to, that's a horrible term for Scots, though, jock. I'm not a sports jock, not a fraternity bro, or whatever you want to call it. But dancers, for instance, people who are, or lovers, people who are very good at sex, I have nothing but admiration for those people, as long as their style is not horrible. I don't like tattoos and kind of, oiled up muscles and all the rest of it. Physicality shouldn't go beyond a certain boundary as far as I'm concerned. But I have endless admiration for endless groups of people. I think you'd be surprised. I might often come off as quite dismissive. I have admiration for want of a better term, third world people all over the world. When I was in Myanmar 2 years ago, endless admiration for the extremely poor people in Myanmar. So all this talk of the world economy, of economies losing 6% or whatever this quarter, I don't give a damn, because I really want to reach a stage where everyone is too poor to afford a car, especially an SUV, for a start. That's one of my ambitions. I really want people to have to go back to horses because they're not going to voluntarily give these things up. I mean, obviously cities will become more and more hostile to cars, which is a great thing, more and more friendly to electric vehicles and small mobility devices. But also I want the economy to be bad in some ways. I want the cultural section to be super strong, but I want the economy to be bad in terms of fossil fuels and, pointless consumerism. So I want everyone to be like how people were in Myanmar when I saw them a couple of years ago. They were visually very startling. Everyone looked like they were extras in an Adamant video, basically. People looked like new romantics with their face makeup and their amazingly bright colours and baggy trousers and sarongs, lungi. I have huge admiration for enormous sections of the world's population. I'm going to leave you with that. That was a weird ramble, wasn't it? The important fact, though, is how much I admire you.
Open University.